Hello, everybody, and welcome to GatherVerse News Unscripted, where we bring you fresh, humanity-centered tech journalism. I'm Priya, and I'm so excited about today's interview. We're going to be talking to a real-life Top Gun Maverick. If you've seen the movie, you know. If you don't, we do have a trailer coming up for you soon, so you're going to learn. We're going to be peeling back, the cockpit lid here a little and peeking into what the U.S. Air Force is doing. They're changing how they train fighter pilots. They're using new technologies, VR goggles, artificial intelligence, to help train fighter pilots more quickly and more safely. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the future of war, and if even within our lifetimes, we might see a time when we don't need human pilots at all. First, we want to thank our show sponsor today. Our sponsor is Arroyo Insurance. Arroyo Insurance is the best insurance and risk management service at the most competitive premiums, backed by superior service. Our guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Gary Jam Moore. Gary is a fighter pilot who's been stationed all around the world, and he also saw active duty while he was deployed in Afghanistan. He was in combat there, and he is now training the next generation of fighter pilots at Sheppard Air Force Base in North Texas. Sheppard is one of 4 bases in the United States where the United States trains their fighter pilots. So, Gary, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Well, thanks so much, Priya. It's a pleasure to be here.
And how long have you been in the Air Force and training as a pilot?
Yeah, so I'm coming up on 23 years in the Air Force, and so I've been throughout that time, as you mentioned. So combat deployments, operational tours, and then now this is my 3rd tour as an instructor pilot. So training, as you mentioned, the next generation of fighter pilots for in both the U.S. and some of our allies.
Well, I think people do have some familiarity, at least, with what fighter pilots trainers seem to do because of Top Gun, because of that movie. I mean, do you get that question a lot? Are people saying, is your life exactly like what we see in Top Gun, or is it very different? Let's roll a little bit of that video now so we can enjoy the movie.
Yeah, well, I'll have to say I wish I played a lot more volleyball on the beach and checked less email and wrote, did less paperwork. But there is a lot to be said for the movie. I actually really enjoyed it. In fact, actually, my squadron, we rented out the entire theater when it came out, and we all went and saw it. It's a great movie, and I think there's a lot of accurate things in there that really do depict, how we do train pilots for our nation's military. Obviously, it's a Navy-centered, movie, but a lot of we're doing a lot of the same things in the Air Force as well.
Okay. What shocked me, I think, was how close those planes seemed to get in the movie. I sort of assumed that was all movie magic, but is that real?
Yeah, there's certainly times where we do get pretty close, but as you're probably seeing in that clip right there, generally we try to avoid getting that close. We have rules that generally prevent that if, as we're doing air-to-air combat training and so on. But it certainly looks good on film in Hollywood, that's for sure.
Well, Gary, you're the chief of the innovation unit there at Sheppard Air Force Base. Do all of these trainings sort of need to happen in the same way that they used to, where you're out flying around and learning as you go? You're bringing in new technologies that seem like they're lessening the amount of sort of training time that you need in the air.
Yeah, Priya, that's a great question. Yeah, and so the short version of what we're trying to do in the innovation division here at Sheppard is really trying to figure out how we can make all of the pilots better, faster, if we can, right? So make our training program more efficient. We, just like any organization or an organization with limited resources, right? So I can't just go, kind of go waste time, doing whatever, mission and that sort of thing. I need to maximize, every minute when I'm up in the air, right? So as I'm doing all of that, so if I can make things more efficient, and if I can practice things and I use those technologies to make the training faster, I can make a better pilot in the end.
I think we have some video also of your pilots training with VR goggles on, and you can see some of that simulation too of what they're seeing. Tell us about the steps that you go through in training people through VR.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so really, a lot of this technology is only, as you're probably well aware, is only within the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years tops, as far as the virtual reality and some of the technologies that we now have. And that those technologies are continuing to get faster every year, and we're trying to capitalize on what's out there in the market. Working with industry, working with academia to see what's out there and capitalize on that. Right. So especially with the virtual reality space, looking at, okay, if I can immerse somebody in an environment, we have what's called an immersive training device. It's basically our VR simulator. I think you might see some clips of it as we go through. Yeah, that's it right there. And so what you can see, so once I put on those goggles, I am completely immersed in that environment. When we're working on all the parts and pieces of flying an airplane, not just the physical movements, as you can kind of see there, of moving the throttle and stick around to put the aircraft where I want it, but talking on the radio, looking at, where I am, who are the other aircraft out there. This is a good example here. And some of what we're doing is things that I can't actually do in the aircraft. You see this sort of map that'll sort of appear on his leg there as you're watching this clip here. So there's some activities that we actually can only do within the virtual reality space. And we're actually looking to capitalize on some of that. So again, if I can accelerate that learning by using these technologies, and again, obviously, for me to turn on that computer is pretty low cost compared to going out and burning a lot of jet fuel, right? So if I can do it in here and build some of those capabilities into that pilot training student, all the better.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, cost savings here, massive cost savings. It costs, multiple thousands of dollars an hour to get those planes up in the air during the trainings. The Department of Defense has put a lot of money behind innovation in recent years. Is that sort of the influx of cash that you're using to bring these new programs about?
Yeah, and so what the Air Force specifically has done is what we call innovation funds. So each of the bases, kind of all around the planet, really, in the U.S. Air Force side, have been given. Hey, here's a pot of money that's been set aside specifically for innovation. And so you get a lot of grassroots ideas, and so which has really been great. And so I've been able to put together a team of folks, and in fact, I've got a PhD who's also a pilot, another guy who's got a master's in computer science who does all kinds of coding and data analysis and all that sort of thing. So as I put together this team, and we've been able to take those funds, and really invest in these various technologies, and to see, okay, what's out there, and let's try it out. And a lot of this stuff is, some of it works and some of it doesn't, but we're not going to get there in terms of unless we go out and try those things. And so we've really been given an awesome opportunity to take those risks and to figure out, again, what works and how we can train pilots better.
And let's talk about some of those learnings. You have put a class through VR training and then compared them to a sample class that didn't have VR training. What are the learnings? What are you finding out?
Yeah, and actually, this was they actually did really well. Yeah, we took a class of about 22 students, and really the only difference in their training syllabus, their training flow, was that they had about an additional 20 events where they went into the virtual space there, as you can kind of see on the screen. And we're giving kind of targeted exercises. I kind of use the example of going out and shooting free throws. Okay, you're going to do this event here, and then we're going to go practice this maneuver over here, and get some really targeted training. And oftentimes they'd have an instructor kind of over the shoulder, kind of giving them some tips and tricks and so on. Again, at a zero risk, very low cost, obviously, from the investment side. And what we found is they did better on their what we call our check rides, kind of like our major exams that we have throughout the course. So they did better across the board as a class on those check rides. And then also we're able to get across the finish line and finish the program and took less sorties. So both, again, better and faster. And so those were the initial results. And as a result of that, we're now going to then implement that kind of wholesale, kind of across the board in all of our various training syllabi here at Sheppard.
So does that mean a lot more VR goggles come into Sheppard?
Yeah, that's right. So not only the VR goggles, as you mentioned, the students get issued those with, kind of like an Oculus Quest or similar, a slightly different variety with a library of just videos they can watch about the various maneuvers to kind of learn from it.
It's the Pico headset, right, that you have there?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And which, again, I always say is much better than me standing up giving a PowerPoint presentation. They're immersed in that environment, watching somebody do those maneuvers, and then they can get into the virtual reality simulator, and then go attempt to fly those maneuvers themselves. And then practice them before they actually even get in the aircraft. So we've seen, again, a lot of accelerated learning through all that process. And as you mentioned, we're continuing to invest. We're getting a new version of that immersive training device here this fall, and expect another one coming next year as well. So we're continuing to make more of an investment into those technologies because we've seen the return on that investment.
Gary, I want to know what you all are doing with AI. Here I'm in San Francisco, right next to Silicon Valley, definitely inside the tech bubble. It was just at an AI hacker house party last night. A lot of young people, a lot of talk about how artificial intelligence is changing the world. Is it making its way into the work that you do day to day?
Yeah, I will say I mean, from the AI perspective specifically here locally, we haven't implemented anything yet, but there's a lot on the horizon. One of the things we're looking specifically at, as I mentioned, there's various training syllabi that we're executing. So in the building I'm sitting in here, I think there's probably several hundred students, several hundred instructors, 6, 7 different training syllabi, all doing different things, and we'll fly up to 300 training missions out of the air base here on any day, right, on a given day, right? So now to schedule all that, to schedule the right student with the right aircraft with the right instructor is very difficult. So one of the things we're looking at is AI-enabled scheduling, right? So you wouldn't completely take a human out of that process, but you'd have that AI to help that process and make it a lot more efficient, right? Another thing we're lking at is AI-enabled instruction. So those, we looked at those VR trainers that you kind of saw there on the screen a minute ago, is now not only adding, a kind of a real-time evaluation, how is your airspeed control or how is your altitude control, some of those basics of flying an aircraft that's going to sort of give you a grade either real-time or afterwards, and now adding to that an instructor, right? So if you're too slow, and then you're going to hear a voice that's going to say airspeed or something, right? And speed up, right? So so starting at probably a basic level, and then kind of just continuing to work from there. I will say this: flying an airplane is pretty complicated, right? So it's not just like necessarily even driving a car, which is more two-dimensional, if you will, right? So it's very three-dimensional, very dynamic, especially the fighter pilot training that we're doing here. So the idea of getting to a full AI instructor where I'm out of a job here is probably not anytime on the horizon.
Well, what about the other side of that? Not an AI trainer necessarily, but an AI pilot. What about not having a human actually in that cockpit?
Yeah, and that's definitely something the Air Force and other DoD agencies are certainly looking at right now, as far as how can I do this to make all of how we're training more efficient, right? So and then now in getting to a combat situation, right? So they're looking at unmanned airplanes that could potentially fly either autonomously, or where you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 manned airplanes that now have sort of a squadron of unmanned aircraft flying with them. And now, again, as we mentioned, one of the things we're always sort of thinking about is that risk management, right? So if I'm going to go into a hostile environment that we can kind of imagine in our brain, or think Top Gun, right? And if I could put an unmanned system into that, obviously that reduces risk for the human, right? So are we ever going to get to a situation where they can just kind of go completely go on their own? I don't know if we're going to get there anytime soon, because again, combat is not a black and white sort of environment, right? It's not a a series of easy decisions. There's a lot of decisions to be made. So and with those complex environments, I think you're going to need a human in there, at least for the foreseeable future, for sure.
In a recent discussion that you had with some other members of the military, you all talked about an impending war, that you're preparing for the next war. Is that just terminology that the military has, that you're always preparing for the next war? Or is there something we should be keeping in mind? Is there a war coming?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, for us as the military, we're always going to be charged with, defending our nation, right? So whatever that looks like. And then I would even take that into, in terms of my current mission here, is we're training a lot of the NATO members, right? So there's a lot of countries. We have 14 different nations that train their fighter pilots here in North Texas, believe it or not. So for example, I think it's the Germans and the Dutch and a few others, where all of their initial fighter pilot training is done right here in Texas because, better weather and, a number of factors. But what I'm saying there is, oh, by the way, we're all familiar with what's going on in Ukraine, right? So a lot of these guys who are going, into, back to, once we train here and then going back to Europe to fly whatever fighter, we train Norwegians and some of the Scandinavian countries, right? So those are bordering Russia, so these are, for them, it's much more real, right? So as we think about what that next thing could be, I mean, in some ways it's happening now, right? And obviously, but then, other countries that potentially could be a threat in the future, we're always wanting to make sure that we're training the best pilot that we can for whatever may occur in the future, and to have these guys and gals as they walk out of the door here to be best prepared, again, and using technology to get there.
Gary, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Do you have any final words, closing thoughts on, the changing nature of training pilots and how emerging technology is really making a difference and changing those lives and practices?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think, kind of as I mentioned, I mean, I think it's, a lot of what we do is not without risk. And so one of the things that we're always sort of working through is, okay, so lot of great ideas and a lot of technology out there, but then to really integrate it is really the tough part, which is what we're seeing. So, change is hard for a lot of folks, and a lot of folks don't like change, but I think there's a way to get there. And again, the way that technology is really accelerating, especially things like virtual reality, and especially, as you already mentioned, that Department of Defense and other agencies are really investing in that, which I think is great, and taking those risks, which I think is the right way we need to go as an agency, as we kind of move forward and continuing to make things better, and again, to train the best pilots we can for our nation.
All right. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Gary Jam Moore, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Priya. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Man, what a fascinating look at how the U.S. Air Force is changing their technology and their ways in training people so it can be safer and it can be faster. There are always a host of questions around the military, how it uses money, and what it is doing as we move forward. And it's rare, I think, that we really get to go inside and see what those changes are as they're happening in real time. So thank you again to Gary. Thank you also to our show sponsor today. Our show sponsor today is Arroyo Insurance, the best insurance and risk management services at the most competitive premiums, backed by superior service. And we want to say a special thank you today to the person who brought Arroyo Insurance to us, Client Success Manager Kara Salmons, and her entire team at Arroyo Insurance. If you'd like to share your business with hundreds of other viewers who are invested in emerging technology, you can reach us at GatherVerseNews.org. And friends, I just want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this journey where we learn about how emerging technology is changing our lives. I appreciate you being here. And we're looking forward to having you come on back tomorrow when host Raphael Timmons will be talking with you. All right, see you tomorrow. Thanks again.